Spirituality and self-discovery are the same thing. Neither one of them is an additive process. In spirituality, there is a shift of perception, or a shift in perception. It's really a changing of what's perceived. And that change in perception is the product of letting go. Letting go of that to which attention is given. That frees up the bandwidth of perception. And instead of content being perceived, there is a sense of space and energy. The freeing of attention from content doesn't come through stopping the mind, but rather the reaction to the mind. And the reaction to the mind doesn't happen through self-control. The diminishing of the reaction to the mind doesn't happen through self-control. It's not a discipline. It happens through non-attachment to the subject of thoughts and situations. There's awareness of what heretofore has been taken to be self. But that self, or what's taken to be self, appears in the awareness we are. And it's dependently originated, that content-based self, or thing taken to be self. It's subtle and gross, it's flesh, it's thought, it's energy, and it all bears the mantle of self. So thoughts and situations relating to it, to the extent to which these things, or this it being a complex, is identified with, the more that's identified with, the greater the reaction to thoughts and situations. And in that lack of reactivity, there's a change in what's perceived. And that can't be described, can only be realized. And it can't be realized through the holding of conceptual knowledge, the holding of concepts, the learning of concepts, unless they involve letting go, the concepts that destroy the attachment to concepts and form and energy. Those ideas have been described as something disposable, something that's used like I think it was Ramana Maharshi who said like a stick that takes an object out of your eye and is then thrown away as well. So it's a stick that removes the stick and then is thrown away. So the concepts of letting go can be employed mindfully if one has enough to let go of that's taking up space. It's the appearance of that space in quantity, magnitude, something large that has been let go of will leave a big space. And so the potential energy for the realization of the non-self nature of phenomena is the suffering that comes from strong delusion. So if there's great delusion, there is a great sense of being a perishable self, and that creates a fear. And that fear hides the natural state, hides the perception of love. And that fear can't be dispelled in totality so long as there's an identification with a perishable self, or even just a mental self that is identified. There's an identity built of ideas, and it's threatened by ideas that countervail it. So there's the mind, which is the subtle form that colors the energy body to the extent that it's identified with, and then there's the form, for which there's fear also. So in identification with those things is a vulnerability. It not only causes fear for the self, but the fear for the things that belong to the self. So possessiveness, greed, the need to ever accumulate, because there's no limit to the amount of things that one can accumulate in the quest to make permanent the impermanent, because there's no amount that will do it. So there can be a constant accumulation on behalf of what's perceived to be self. And that's kind of the modus operandi of pretty much every living being. And humans especially, we accumulate, whereas animals that sort of live within the ecosystem, the unbuilt environment, they don't have to accumulate but for whatever period of time, like winter, and that's only certain animals. Otherwise, they live like the foxes and the birds. They accumulate nothing, whereas we, for fear of this idol of self, will build these empires of objects and ideas. So the suffering serves many purposes. It is something of which to be aware, and the magnitude and duration of the suffering increases the likelihood that it will be noticed, and a search in earnest will be embarked upon to discover the source of the suffering. So it creates a mindfulness and a reason. And secondly, there's energy behind suffering. And energy is transmuted by what's held in mind. And the energy body is colored by its vibration, is determined by what's held in mind. And when it is in the levels of fear, what's perceived is not taken to be in the energy body. It's just emotions at that level. It's just emotions. The content forms sort of a layer of insulation over the energy body that really hems perception into the flesh. And then when that insulation, it's kind of an egoic shell, is broken away, then there is perceived the energy that comes at the headwaters of awareness. There's a stillness in which the headwaters, which are love, are reflected. Saint Francis of Assisi said that what we're looking for is where we're looking from. So the quest of spirituality is triggered by the noticing of pain and a search to find those tools that can help alleviate it. And if one is fortunate to discover the modality of surrender, a great deal of energy can be taken out from under fearful thought structures, obsessions, bad memories, fears, things like that. The process of surrender can diminish the energy that underlies those thoughts. And so there has to be a noticing of the offending thought, and a change in attention to the feeling that underlies the thought. And then you feel that thought fully, and let it make you feel how it makes you feel. And then you let it go. You give it over to a higher power. And in that letting go is given over some energy. And every time that thought appears, repeat that process, and it really starts to diminish that thought's power over attention. It's how magnetic it is. It doesn't have the energy beneath it that it formerly had. And so its power to catch attention diminishes. And if enough such thought structures are then dealt with in the same way, creates a vast spaciousness in their wake. It's not an additive process. It's not building something up, a bigger and better you. It's not a building up of self, but rather a letting go of that which was perceived to be self, which is, for many people, just an aggregation of memories that are either going to be felt nostalgically if they were good, or painfully and traumatically if they were bad. But even in the case of nostalgia, there's a pain in it. So, and as we get older, the store of those memories gets greater and greater, and it just becomes a more painful place, and it's forgotten what a relief the moment can be present. Most people confuse the feeling of being aligned with the moment with the thing that brought their attention into the moment out of thoughts. They attribute the joy they get to the object of attention, not realizing that it's attention's alignment with the moment that opens the heart to the truth of this moment. The pleasure is not in the object, for the object doesn't even need to change for the pleasure to be gone from it. It's the loss of novelty. And so there's a quest in life to get different levers to pull awareness into the moment, never realizing that just through a process of letting go, awareness can be liberated to be aligned with the truth of reality. And in that is a totally different perception. It's a dying unto oneself, really a dying unto the identification with the idol of oneself. So self-discovery is spirituality as well, in that if through the correct process of self-discovery it's discovered that form and thought are not self, then if their non-self nature is revealed experientially, not just known conceptually, but through a process of letting go that creates enough space for there to be perceived a perception of distance between what's aware and what appears within awareness, to realize that what is the self has to be what's aware. Nothing that appears in that awareness can be the self that's aware of it. If that's the self-discovery, then that's going the same place as spirituality, because the way that reality is perceived changes. There's less reactiveness, because the conceptual self is no longer an object of disturbance. So there's a peace. And no amount of understanding can reveal it. Just a letting go to where things can be seen apart from the lens of self, which causes all the reactions that obscure the nature of reality. So the modality of surrender creates the space, or allows the space. And the practice of meditation does give focus. The ability to put awareness into either the gross feeling of, where the body meets the floor, or the breathing. To try to stop thoughts with countervailing thoughts is just proliferation. Attention should be then instead given over to something that's more in line with the present, such as the feelings that underlie thoughts, breathing, energy. These things are in alignment with the will that makes this appear. And not some counter narrative to it, some alternative of how it should be, how it should have been, could have been, should be in the future. These are all disputes with the present. And in them, there's only relative truth. There's not absolute truth. There is only the truth relative to the self that's perceived to be represented by a form and thought structure. There's no perception of truth in the relative. There's no perception of the absolute in the relative. The absolute does not appear from behind the lens of self in identification with, because of the distortions caused by self-care, self-concern, self-focus. And you can see the variability of this in the people you know. How the more self-concerned seem to carry a heavier burden than those who are more free to be in the moment, less concerned about the thoughts looping in their head, less in the future and less in the past. They might not even know that's why they're happy. They're just allowed to be happy. There's things that can cause that. Sometimes it's just having a hobby. To bring one into alignment. Gardening, making models, playing music. They can all be spiritual practices. And these are all the things that cultivate the soil of the heart, from which grows the spirit in the light of the truth, the absolute truth, the non-relative truth. Blessed are the poor in spirit. They have impetus to seek. I'll pray for our world.